Today is November 22nd, 2020, which marks 57 years since the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And I, there is still healthy debate about what exactly went down in Dallas that day. So joining me is a panel of the most respected and authoritative minds on JFK that I had in my phone contacts. Uh, Craig Pasta who is playing the part of a Velvet John Goodman today, has joined us, along with DNC fraud lawsuit attorney, author, and all around wonderful human being, Jared Beck, and our good friend and brother, Jason Burmis. I am incredibly stoked for this. I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. So let's just get right down to it, gentlemen. Um, who shot JFK?
In my opinion, who shot JFK? Well,
Yes.
I got this fancy memo over here that has been contested for years, but then when you really look into it, especially after the dumps that came from Trump. Remember, he told us he was going to give us everything twice, couldn't do it, couldn't expose the deep state. But this document had been around, actually, this memorandum that you see behind me with Oswald for some time. And I became aware of it somewhere around 2000, and where is it? 2004, because a local NBC station had put it out there. It is a memo from John McCone to James Rowley. So obviously involved with intelligence to the intelligence director. And if you read it, it not only says that Oswald was Central Intelligence and trained by the Office of Naval Intelligence, but it references something called the Brueys memorandum. And that was really the key for me, because if you read this 2-page document, it says basically people on the inside of the FBI, the CIA, and the Secret Service killed Kennedy. Said their own people. So what I did is I went and I found as much as I possibly could on Warren C. DeBrew. And when he died, and you read this probe, there's a lot of misinformation about his death. You see, in the 70s, CBS actually did a 2-part special with Dan Rather where they talked to Warren C. DeBrew, and they also talked to a guy named, I want to pronounce it right, Ernest Ortiz. There it is. Orest Pena, that's it. And Orest Pena was an FBI informant for Warren C. DeBrew. Now, he testified that not only was Oswald an FBI informant, but DeBrew was his handler. And not only was his handler, he threatened Ortiz, if he said anything, that he would kill you, you son of a bitch. All on this special, all documented. I've already done a video on it. Everybody can check it out. Now, when he died, the word was that he came in and he did what was the initial probe of the JFK assassination. In other words, he was shipped from New Orleans, where he was stationed, and brought there. No. No. When those documents rolled out, it proved he was there the week before, following Oswald. He was already in Dallas. Outside of his obituary, there is an FBI, basically it's one of those FBI books where it goes through, it tells about everybody's career before they're dead. It's like a trade book. I'd found that, and it said he did the initial 800-plus page investigation, overnight investigation of the assassination. In other words, he was already there. He was put in charge of the real investigation that would go to the top, that would name names, and still to this day be classified. Find it for me. I have yet to find this 800-page document, which obviously exists, regarding the assassination, and everything I've seen about this guy has been distorted. Okay, that the conspiracy theories are false, that he wasn't handling Oswald as FBI, that he wasn't even there until after the assassination took place, all of which has now been debunked. So to me, the key to solving the JFK murder is getting that initial 800-plus page investigation, declassifying it to the people, and seeing who is named in it as the operatives that took JFK out.
Oswald is so obviously like an intelligence asset. I think his own mother is on video saying like, "Oh yeah, he's CIA. How do you renounce your citizenship? Like go to Russia, proclaim that you're going to give information to the Soviet government and then easily obtain a passport to come back to the United States." And this is his own mother just saying that. It's like it's insane. And then when like I'm like pretty sure that Jason, you've seen this video, but like they interview Brueys and ask him about his like relationship with Oswald, and he's so obviously lying, and he's smiling through the whole thing too. He's like, "No, I don't know anything. I don't know.
Who killed Oswald?
Who killed him? I mean, we talking about Jack Ruby, obviously pulling the trigger.
And who did Jack Ruby have connections with?
That's where, when we start speculating on things like that are inside of JFK, the greatest film on the matter, that's where, fact meets fiction. I always try to stick to what I can prove and what's out there. And when you look at Ruby and you look at his mafioso ties, obviously you can get in on that angle. When you can get in the anti-communism, Castro angle, those are angles that the media's played up quite a bit. It's a party!
You can't say Jack Ruby, whatnot. Well, I mean, I think that's if you start working your way backwards, because you're not going to find a lot of paperwork on how this stuff went down. And I think you have to look at the golden ages, I guess they called it, of the mafioso and their connections on how much political power they had and where Joe Kennedy got a lot of his strength from and whatnot. But Jack Ruby ran a book for a guy by the name of Carlos Marcello. Carlos Marcello was one of the lords of the underground in New Orleans and had a lot of connections in Dallas. And you kind of think about where JFK was killed in Dallas. Carlos Marcello also had a very tight relationship with a guy named Johnny Rosselli. And Johnny Rosselli was one of the guys who ran L.A. at the behest of a guy named Sam Giancana. Sam Giancana, they've made movies about this guy. They made a movie called Sugar Time. It was with John Tortoro. But Sam Giancana also had relationships with a lot of Hollywood stars, and one in particular was Marilyn Monroe. And I heard there was a lot of speculation and kind of decision on when they wanted to get rid of JFK. And this is when the mob worked very closely with the CIA and whatnot, because the Mafia for years controlled the docks. When Lucky Luciano was deported to Italy, he controlled the docks over there. He gave intelligence to the Americans for what the fishermen were doing. In other words, a lot of people felt Del Duce, Mussolini, was using a lot of his fishermen to get information on when the Americans were having boats out there in the water. Well, Lucky Luciano took that over, and he worked with intelligence to make sure that everything was safe in that particular region. Well, Sam Giancana was another guy. They made a story. He was out in L.A. a lot with his guy Johnny Rosselli. Now, this guy Johnny Rosselli had connections with the CIA up the yin yang here and there. And the story that I was told, and I'm working my way backwards on this one, and it's like the Jack Ruby link. A couple guys by the name of Carlos Marcello, who supposedly there's a videotape out there right now of him somewhere. I was talking to some people trying to find it. On his deathbed in prison, he confessed that he had made a call to Marduzzo, who is Jimmy Hoffa, to give the words that it was done, that he was gone, and that being JFK. And he worked closely with these guys. He had a lot of connections with this guy named Santos Trafficante. Santos Trafficante had a lot of backing from the Four Horsemen that we know from the back in the days. And JFK only won his election because of a guy by the name of Frank Costello, who was one of those original Four Horsemen. They called this guy Frank Costello the prime minister because he fixed elections left and right. And from what I heard from the people I always talked to, is they always talked about how JFK was such a schmuck that he actually thought he won. But he only won at the behest because of guys like Frank Costello, who used to run booze with Joe Kennedy in Chicago, and that's how the connections were there. And there was a promise from Joe Kennedy that his son would go and help them get back Cuba, because the Italians were so invested in the casinos, whatnot. And when that fell through, and Bobby was going after Hoffa, it really turned the underworld upside down, because they were all connected to the pension fund of Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters, whatnot. So there came a time when the CIA was pissed off of what was going on. The underworld was pissed off of what was going on. Promises were not kept. So that's when the decision was to work together, from what I heard, to take out JFK. So
Jared,
we go into more details as we go along. It's a long story, but that's I kind of work my way backwards on this. When you watch the Ruby hit, he just went up and whacked this guy in front of everybody, and everybody was saying, who's Ruby got this connection with? Why did Jack Ruby take this guy out? Because that's what they were doing. They were taking everybody out who had any connection to what's going on. The stories I was told is that wise guys, they worked along, they involved Oswald, but it was CIA's guys and wise guys working together to protect their interest, and they took out JFK.
Jared, I would love for you to weigh in on this, because you also said that you had over the last couple of months some revelations about this, and I'm very excited to hear them, and I know that our audience is too.
Yeah, thank you. And it's real privilege to be here on this very important day, which is the anniversary of, I think no matter how you understand it, a seminal moment in American history, and one that I think as a society we're going to have to keep going back to until we absorb and understand what went down that day, in order to really, I think, move forward and heal as a society. I really see November 22nd, 1963 as a day of that magnitude. And it's something I come back to a lot myself, to research and re-research and read and reread. And I've been doing that actually a long time. And part of that is because of the movie that I believe Jason mentioned, JFK, which is an excellent movie, and a very unique movie when you think about it. And I guess I'm, by way of getting into my most recent thoughts on JFK, maybe we can explore that question first, is some of the uniqueness of this event, not necessarily in terms of what happened on that day, but in terms of how that event has been narrated to the American public and to the world. Really almost actually beginning on the day it happened, of course, with the mainstream media reports. And I think there's something very, very unusual about JFK that separated it from other events, and the fact that you have both a mainstream narrative that, I mean, you have that for every significant event that you can think of in the 20th and 21st centuries in America. But you also have a very, very vigorous counter narrative that was pushed very, very soon in the aftermath of JFK. And that counter narrative is the concept that Craig and Jason have been talking bits of, and I'm interested to pursue that further, but all these pieces that go together to explain why Oswald wasn't a lone shooter and that there was a conspiracy. Who started that counter narrative? Well, I think it originates about 4 weeks after the shooting with a guy by the name of Mark Lane. Very, very interesting character. This is an attorney who was also a local politician in New York City, member of the Communist Party, somebody who was in the military, probably military intelligence. Later served as counsel to Jim Jones during the Jonestown incident in Guyana. So immediately, for me, a lot of red flags go off with Mark Lane. The second red flag that goes off with Mark Lane, in my opinion, is the fact that he publishes 15 questions about, from a defense lawyer's perspective, about suggesting that Oswald may be innocent. This is within 4 weeks of the shooting. The article gets published in a publication called the National Guardian, which was a communist left-wing publication. And when we understand that, we have to also understand the admissions of the CIA before the Church Committee in the 1970s. And if anybody familiar with what I'm talking about, basically the CIA admitted before Congress, quite gleefully, in fact, that they had for a long time infiltrated all of the media in the U.S., not just the mainstream media, but in fact these so-called left-wing alternative media, including Ramparts, National Guardian, Paris Review, you name it, so that the CIA was in a position not only to control narratives through the mainstream media, which I think, it's uncontroversial at this point to say that the mainstream media is a controlled organ of propaganda, but also to control all counter narratives. Okay. And we see that today, with our elections, just to take an aside. I'm sorry, I'm kind of taking a long time to get here, but I think there's, to get where I'm going, and I'm actually not really sure where I'm going because this is all.
We're almost 60 years into this murder, Jared.
Yeah.
You can take a minute to wind up. The
Let
reason
me-
that I've got you all here, really,
Yeah.
is because Pasta's got the Old Man Goomba card room stories. You've got, the significant amount of research that you've done. Burmis has a significant amount of research that he's done, and I'm hoping that, we can all give each other sort of a special knowledge hug. Right.
Okay.
And that after that special hug, we in fact solve a murder and liberate society.
Right. Well, I'm not saying we should all, sit around and do a circle jerk and, basically
No, I
pat
promise
each other
I
on.
wouldn't take my dick out today.
But what I like about your show and why I particularly enjoy coming on here is because I feel like, Steve, that you promote this concept of political literacy, which I think is entirely missing in the array of media that's available in the U.S. today. In other words, it's not so much what you believe, it's acquiring the tools and the practices that allow you to become a literate observer of American politics. And I think that's what this society is maybe more missing than anything else. And I guess in order to teach political literacy, you sort of have to model it for people. And we have a lot of very bad models in the media. We have a lot of people that they just want to hear themselves talk. They have guests on. It's all, agenda driven. There's a framework that they want to get across. And, if you don't stay within that framework as a guest or a participant, then, you're diverted. And I think that's not how we obtain political literacy. We have to obtain political literacy by completely opening our minds to new possibilities and then surrounding ourselves with other people who may think entirely different from us. And then we have to sort of let the thoughts flow. And getting back to the JFK, this is something that, I was a big, for a long time, I've been a big proponent of the alternative narrative that I think started with Mark Lane, reached its sort of maybe largest audience with the JFK film, and probably its best expression is in a recent book by a guy named James Douglas called JFK and the Unspeakable, which consolidates a lot of these various strands of research. For example, Oswald's, Gloria, I think you were talking about this earlier, Oswald's footprints with intelligence. I mean, there's an extraordinary body of work right now, which goes through the minutia of the files that were kept on Oswald well before he surfaced with the assassination, going back to his time in the Soviet Union, going back to his time at the military base in Japan, where he was working on high-level stuff associated with the U2 project. So I mean, there's this incredible thick body of materials. It's actually quite dense, and it's takes a lot of patience to wade through it. And if you're just interested in that aspect of it, I highly recommend a book reading stuff by John Newman, who focuses specifically on the CIA files with Oswald and reveals a lot of interesting stuff. But Douglas is maybe a better starting point for the layperson because he consolidates all of that material and puts it into a very cohesive narrative, and adds a lot of just good literary twists and stuff to make it a very, very interesting read. So when you read that book and finish it, you feel like you have a mastery as much as you're going to get of what happened that day from the alternative narrative perspective. Now, my problem with that, and I think what's troubling me today as I sit here and speak with all of you in this forum, is that there are a lot of red flags associated with the alternative narrative that have really been popping out at me lately as I've really been just going back and looking and re-looking at the way the media works in this country, the way that events are reported, the way that events are staged, the way that fiction becomes fact. And I feel that the issues with the counter narrative, not the mainstream narrative, but the counter narrative, are perhaps as significant, if not more so, than the issues with the original narrative, which leads me to believe that there is a third narrative being buried here, very consciously so, by the intelligence agencies and the others who have staged this incredible production for us, which I would call the apparent assassination of JFK. And they've been using it to form our understanding of U.S. politics for a long time, and they're still using it. And I don't know that as we sit here today, the question was posed by Steve, who shot JFK? I don't know that that's a knowable fact for us sitting here today. I don't know if it will be a knowable fact within our lifetimes. I think what we can do, though, is we can perhaps get to the possibility of knowing through just focusing and thinking and approaching these issues with a very open mind. And I'm happy to talk more about this. I just don't want to hog up a lot of time and keep other people from chiming in. I do have more to say about the details of what I'm talking about, but this sort of, I thought I would just give folks a sense of where I'm approaching this from, because there's a lot of interesting stuff to sink your teeth into.
Burmis looks like he's about ready to bubble over.
Yeah,
I'm certainly not ready to bubble over, but I did think it was very interesting. He mentioned Mark Lane. So if we go to this document right here, this is actually the document where they go over Pena's testimony, and one of the people that he did tell, other than CBS, as you can see up here, Pena told a number of people, including Mark Lane and Harold Weisberg, that Oswald was an FBI informant in 1975. Pena publicly alleged that Oswald was an FBI informant on CBS television, as I've already referenced. Now, the interesting thing about this document, again, I believe this was actually also part of the dumps just in these last several years, is that his testimony was omitted from the Warren Commission, that he'd stated that Warren C. DeBrew, and we now know that through the documentation that has come out, was in Dallas prior to the Kennedy assassination, which he was. And you look at the history of DeBrew himself. He is a lifelong intelligence asset who was hunting Nazis in Central America and Mexico prior to working for the FBI, and then after the FBI went into other intelligence works and then the private sector. So again, I never contend I know who pulled the trigger. I know exactly who the players are. But when I've seen this one document, the McCone-Rowley document, and it's been debunked for years on the Randy forums, I don't think it's, I think it's legitimate. I mean, I think that the path it's led me down now, the last 15 years looking at it, that's what I'd like to see. I don't know who pulled the trigger. I get it, back into the left. I don't know where the shots came from. I don't know how uninvolved Oswald was. I mean, Oswald obviously had something to do with this. Even if you watch the JFK movie, they've got, Oswald in these weird situations with these people that seem to be connected, right? The Joe Pesci character and the Tommy Lee Jones character. And obviously Clay Bertram is the one guy that went to trial. And at the time was very compromised, right? One of the things they kind of alluded to is he was a closeted homosexual in that time. And we see that throughout politics and history, even to this day, compromising people of power and politicians via their sexual preferences. So I'm just saying this. I certainly don't think that Oswald pulled the trigger. Now, I don't think he's all the way innocent either. Again, you look at this guy, for instance, Pena is also named to have been with him when they got passports. Okay? And he's like, listen, I knew who Oswald was. I'd been around him before. If we applied for a passport together, I would know about that. So that brings into question how he got that passport in the first place. And of course, we have those photographs of a second Oswald, who is clearly not the Lee Harvey Oswald that we saw get shot, or who has been blamed for the assassination, in those embassy photos. So again, there is a lot of layers of deception. And again, I never say I know exactly what happened, but I think that we now have a good lead to where the documentation can be found, where we would have a much better idea and names would actually be named.
Let me ask a question. Let's assume the alternative narrative is correct. Let's say that Oswald was an intelligence asset. There was a conspiracy by what's commonly known as now the deep state to bump off JFK because he was a problem. Maybe he wanted to scatter the CIA to the winds, as he was quoted as saying once. Maybe he fundamentally disagreed with them on policy issues. Whatever. They saw him as a problem. They took him out. Okay. Why would here's the question I have. If assuming that's all true, why would the deep state publicize the alternative narrative as much as it has for this particular event? You have a Hollywood movie by Oliver Stone, 1992. You have Jason. You mentioned the trial of Clay Shaw. Okay, that was went all the way to jury verdict. Okay, very extensive undertaking by a very prominent prosecutor, Jim Garrison in New Orleans. The deep state has the way of shutting things down if it wants to. If it wants to shut down a lawyer from doing a trial, it can do that very easily. It has 1,000 different ways. If it doesn't want Hollywood to make a movie about something, well, come on, guys. I mean, the CIA and Hollywood are one and the same in many ways. So you have to believe they wanted that movie made, okay? And not just, there were movies made before JFK too. I mean, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, I believe was on the History Channel. Unlike other events that you see in which the deep state actively suppresses counter narratives, in this case, the counter narrative is actively promoted, and it's promoted and encouraged to the point where you have this extraordinarily thick body of counter narrative literature that you can dig into for years, and I've been doing that. The other folks here have been doing that. I mean, there's just so much out there. Why would the deep state foster this situation?
I would love to answer that because I think I can answer that pretty well.
Yeah, both my hands and everything else is up too. Let's start with you, Jason.
Let's take a shot at that.
All right. So number one, I don't think that the quote unquote deep state is omnipresent. They're not God. You can't suppress all information. So what do you do instead? You manage it. You manage it. And I would call it the ancient aliens phenomenon that we've seen now, where there was a time when you would suppress stories about UFOs and you would suppress that kind of information. Now you promote them. Now you go to the History Channel. It's not the Hitler Channel. It's not the World War II Channel. It's aliens, man. And I think that's totally to obfuscate propulsion systems. I don't believe that, we're being visited and our entire culture, is based on these ancient aliens, but that's being pushed. Mainline, Hearst, History Channel, it's all over the place. Now, in the regard of Hollywood doesn't want to make JFK films, I would argue, hey man, I'm one of the guys that made Loose Change. Do you think they wanted an alternative 9/11 narrative to be out there as hardcore as it was in that era of 2005 to 2006 and 7? I would argue no. So how do you manage that?
No, I think I totally disagree. I think 9/11 is actually an event that shares a lot in common with the JFK event, in the sense that I think both the alternative narratives and the mainstream narratives are equally pushed, because there's things that are unknowable for us. I don't mean to. No. I guess what I'm saying is I understand what you're saying about management of information. In this case, though, it's management of information which has actually ended up in being in the alternative view being the mainstream view. Because if you actually poll people, nobody says they buy the Warren Commission report anymore. Okay, so the Warren Commission report was the mainstream view for a while, but they've managed this in such a way that they've allowed the alternative narrative to actually overtake and supersede the Warren report. Okay, I mean, yeah, you have some, recent books that try to prop up the Warren report, but I think it's pretty clear to anyone who has a functioning brain cell that the Warren Commission report was a total whitewash.
Let me pose this then. Yeah. So when we've got conflicting narratives that aren't just, kind of discussed, but seem to be fostered on us, when those exist, what that does is it sets the parameters for allowable debate. And now that the parameters have been set for allowable debate, any alternative theories or any addendums to the existing ones are immediately discredited as crazy.
Correct.
They're immediately pushed into the corner, and you are not allowed to participate in the allowable parameters of debate. So in this case, and in the case with 9/11, the more seemingly conflicting the narratives are, the more firmly defined the parameters are, and that becomes the totality of allowable discussion.
Well, let me say this too. I mean, again, with that point, Stephen, I think you're correct. Remember, as an alternative narrative to 9/11 was building, what was starting to be pushed? No planes, directed energy weapons. It was the term 9/11 truther, which truther we still have today. That didn't exist when I got involved. I was part of the 9/11 truth movement. I'm not a fucking truther. I'm never going to be a fucking truther. I'm looking for the truth. Now, on top of all of that, right, what did they also associate it with? You're a 9/11 denier. Oh, now I'm a Holocaust denier. You see how that works? So I really do believe.
Collaborator, Jason. A right-wing grifter. That's the new thing.
Oh, yeah, I'm so right-wing when I was exposing Bush and Kerry at the same time. I mean, it's
I
madness.
get that all the time. I'm a right-wing grifter. I'm a grifter for spending my own money,
I'm getting that now, too. I'm now in the right-wing group because I'm looking for protection of my civil liberties, and I'm talking about election integrity, which are now right-wing conspiracies. So I hear you. It's nice to be in the same group with you all.
We're Nazi collaborators on this channel. That's what we are.
Yeah, we've been hit with that. We've been hit. The show that is fucking entirely demonetized and maybe sees $30 in super chats, once a week. We're grifters too. It's fucking preposterous. Pasta, you've been exceptionally quiet, and I want to thank you for your patience. I'm sure
I'm listening. I mean, it's very interesting too. I mean, it's just so funny because I'm sitting here, I'm laughing because I see Jason Burmis over there, and I just watched Loose Change the other day and stuff, and it's so funny that we've been talking as of late, and we've been talking about Giuliani. Now, when I grew up, I'm 47 years old. Giuliani was known for putting the last knife in the back of the mafia. That was it. He wiped them out. That was the end of, you know what, CIA, FBI, mafioso, we don't need you anymore. We got this. You're irrelevant to us. We don't need you to do anything. It's the 21st century. You're done. Disgraziad, get out of here. And Giuliani was a big part of that. And I always looked at Giuliani as a rat, and a traitor for going after these people for years, you know what I'm saying, and getting rid of them at the behest of who? The other wise guys, the CIA and the FBI. But when you look at, you know, Kennedy's situation and you look at the whole, you know, the whole big macro picture of what was going on, you often have to look about how he got into power and how he got started. And guys like Frank Costello, who was known as the prime minister, like I talk, and you go back, this guy was sought out by FDR at one point. In fact, you know,
Right.
the four horsemen we talk about, which are when the mafioso, when it was Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, and Bugsy Siegel, when they took over and they had gotten rid of Joe DeBoss and Frank Lenzano, the two Italian guys, and they created this kind of like commission, it was the beginning of intertwining the federal government with the mafioso. They started working together. You know what I'm saying? They worked hand in hand. So if you often look at that rise to power, and it's so funny right now because we're sitting here, we're talking about the elections. Several months ago when I heard Nancy Pelosi on the floor of the House and she was trying to push the HEROES Act, she was trying to put an amendment in there. She was trying to squash an amendment, from the HAVA Act, the Help America Vote Act. And she was trying to squash an amendment that allowed 32 states to verify their absentee and mail-in ballots with signatures. Well, it just made me laugh, and right away it made my head just flash about what had happened in the JFK-Nixon race. It was two areas, okay? It was the connections in Dallas, in Texas, with Lyndon Baines Johnson, who'd often had connections with Carlos Marcello, and then in Illinois with Joe a la Jack, whatever they called this guy, who, from the people I talked to, the Goombas in the card room, you know, they say Joe Kennedy was a grumpy, alcoholic asshole that always owed money, whatnot, you know what I'm saying? And one of the ways they coerced him is saying, hey, you know, we're going to make your son president, you know? And then in Illinois, there was also a lot of dead people voting over there. So you see a lot of mail-in ballots and dead people voting in this election right here. And it really just showed you the strength of the mafioso back there, that they can actually put somebody in the White House and then actually take them out when they wanted to. And it just, you fast forward to today with the ballot stuffing in the middle of the night, the mathematical anomalies. Here goes Michigan, 4 o'clock in the morning. Here goes Wisconsin, you know what I'm saying, 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, all of these ballots are coming in, and I expect there's a lot of dead people who voted in this election as well. So for me to see that correlation go together, it was just like, wow. You know, I mean, and unfortunately, Jason and Jared and everybody out there, my people didn't use a lot of documents, whatnot. So there's a lot of sit-downs, a lot of espresso, cappuccinos, a few things, and way things were discussed. So all we get is those card room stories to really tell us what was what. Yeah. But when I grew up, you know, the mafia still had power. It's just they had lost it all at one point. But just like Joe Pesci's character said in JFK, when they asked, he goes, who did this? The mafia? He goes, the mafia, the CIA, it's the same freaking thing, man. It was it really hit hard because they were working hand in hand. And at that particular time, the deep state wasn't the deep state the way it is right now. It was just starting to get stronger after World War II. So they needed the mafia, I think, to pull this off because of the connections they had. I mean, at that time, they had a lot of judges, they had a lot of police departments, they had a lot of commissioners, whatnot. So I really think they had an intricate part to play in this whole whacking of JFK because I do believe, honestly, they had a big part of putting him in office. So, yeah.
Well, you know what's interesting about you talking about Giuliani and JFK, during that press conference, Giuliani actually mentioned the election of JFK as being rigged during that 2-hour plus press conference, and that wasn't picked up anywhere by the media. He said, look, this has been going on for a long time. Look at what happened with JFK. And most people don't want to acknowledge that because, you know, they want to deify JFK as if, you know, he was, he was an angel. I don't believe that personally. He is no angel. Joe Kennedy was no angel. He obviously made some very powerful people upset. You know, when I was a kid and JFK was out there, and obviously it was gaining momentum, and we were told we were finally going to get the documents. And I remember, I'm just in high school, like 92, I'm 13 years old, but you saw it on magazine covers. You had to get the double VHS, spend 3.5 hours with it. Even after watching that, I had kind of been so indoctrinated into, Americana and we're number one, that I was like, yeah, the government probably took him out, but he fucking deserved it. They wouldn't have done it without him deserving it. He was putting us in trouble. So, to that idea of, why would they put that narrative out there? As a kid, it really didn't bother me that much. It wasn't until later on when I started looking at some of the other horrific things my government had done, from human experimentation that came out during the Clinton administration, reading the MK Ultra documents, and then finally, when 9/11 happened, and 6 months later, I start looking into it and I see what's happening there. I'm like, all right, this shit is over with. This is over the top. We got to do something about this. So, I think a lot of it has to do...
Can we draw a straight line from Kennedy's assassination to the success of the PSYOP of 9/11?
Yes. No, yes.
And if so, why?
No. I think. I mean, well, I don't think the JFK assassination is what it purports to be. I think that, and neither does 9/11 for that matter. But I mean, we can't cover everything in one show, obviously. But to answer that question, Steve, I just want to go back to something you said, and then I want to pick up on something Craig said and something Jason said, because there were some really important points that were just made. And I think maybe I just want to crystallize something here. So first off, Steve, you said, and I agree with you 100%, the reason that alternative narratives are put out is to create the parameters of debate. Once you have opposing narratives, then you shut out anything that's a third or a fourth narrative automatically, because it just sounds fucking crazy. Okay, and I do think that's what's going on here. Craig, you mentioned you picked up, rightly so, on a lot of the mafia ties that are going on here and can't be overlooked. And I think that gets into an important question we have to ask is, who was this JFK guy? Okay, where did he come from? Who was his father? And how did and what exactly is the nature of this family? And this is part of my problem with the alternative narrative, is that, and Jason, I appreciate you saying that you don't agree with the concept that JFK was a saint. And I think that's something that people need to get their heads around, because if you read a book like Douglas's JFK and the Unspeakable, it paints a narrative where JFK is really a saint. I mean, he's putting himself up against the establishment. He's sticking his neck out there. He's knowingly being driven around in a car with completely open in Dallas, where he knows he has a ton of enemies. Okay, he's making all kinds of speeches against the CIA. He wants to go in a totally different direction, and yet he's dumb enough to believe that he can ride through Dallas in an open car and nothing's going to happen to him. And I know, there's a lot about, well, his Secret Service did him in, but come on. I mean, if you got a guy like, JFK was no dummy. Okay, why would he put himself in that situation? It's sort of, it beggars belief in a lot of ways. But the real red flag here is that I really do believe that JFK was very much a creation of his father, and his father fit the definition of an oligarch in the society. Okay, way back. So there's a problem here. Okay, if the oligarchy, sure. I mean, oligarchies sometimes, they take out oligarchs or children of oligarchs when they pose trouble for them, but it's really not their preferred method. And I would suggest that in this case, I think it's easy to read JFK as being the moment when the oligarchy sort of publicly declared itself very violently and said, we're really in charge here. The president means nothing. We can blow his head off in full public view, and nothing's going to happen because we're in control. I would suggest that the oligarchy, if that's what you really believe, then what you're actually really you have to admit is that the oligarchy was in control well before JFK came to power. And if you believe that, then his election was a predetermined event, just like I think all elections are in recent history. Yeah. And if it's a predetermined event, then you have to ask for what purpose. And if he was just a puppet, then why would the oligarchy go to the trouble of blowing his brains out in public? I think personally, and there's a great, I want to give a citation to an article that I just wrote, by a person named Miles Mathis. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the name Miles Mathis. I wasn't before I came across this article. It's a very interesting website. There's like a gazillion articles by this one man named Miles Mathis, who claims to be like an artist or something, but he writes like, very complex articles on mathematical theory. And then he has like 1,000 articles about, events in history that aren't what you seem. And he goes through them. And he also seems to be obsessed with certain types of genealogies, which leads me to believe that actually this is probably not one individual, but some kind of operation that's spitting this stuff out for some reason. But there's an article that he wrote called The Hidden Kings, which makes a very compelling case, provocative case. I'm not going to say I buy it, but I'm going to say that if there's a lot of food for thought here, that the Kennedy assassination is a staged assassination. Okay, it's a Hollywood production of a president getting shot. We have no way to know or ascertain whether this John F. Kennedy fellow actually died on that day. The fact is that the Kennedy family is replete with strange deaths, including his older brother, Joe Jr., who died under very mysterious circumstances, piloting a jet fighter. But there's some stuff with that. If you look at it, it's it's not quite sure what went down there. But then, of course, there's also JFK Jr., right? And interesting that JFK Jr. has been recirculated for this election season, and the concept that JFK Jr. Is actually still alive and his death was fake. Now, do people really believe that Q is not some kind of intelligence operation that's trying to befuddle and tantalize and lead a certain segment of a population? I don't believe that for a minute. I think it's got all the hallmarks of intelligence operation. But why are they circulating this JFK Jr. is alive narrative? Is it possible that there's some grain of truth to the concept that the Kennedys' deaths aren't what they seem, and that they bear a ruling position in this oligarchy of ours that is hidden to some view? I mean, I've always thought it's very, very strange that Bobby Kennedy didn't go fucking gangbusters after his brother's head was blown off and get to the fucking bottom of this and or take his family into exile. I mean, isn't that what a normal person does? If my brother's the president and I'm the head of the fucking Justice Department and my brother gets his head shot off, I'm thinking, oh fucking shit, it's really probably not safe for me to stay around here. Okay,
And
if
yet
I want
he
to,
ran for president.
Let me make an argument there. Let me make a couple,
Exactly.
because you said a lot, Jared. And first of all, I do think they killed him. When you mentioned the Secret Service, I'm wondering. I put this in my film 11 years ago now. If you've seen this widely available video where Secret Service agents are pissed that they are taken off the tail end of Kennedy's car
He like throws his hands up like
just before he shot.
Very exaggerated. He's very exaggerated. Do you think a Secret Service person who is used to acting in a very discreet and like everything is under control way is going to like throw up their arms if something's like wrong with the security detail?
Well,
or is he going to discreet? Well, that's why I'm saying this may be part of that scene. And I know that scene because I've seen that scene myself and I've looked at it many times. That scene itself may be part of the production here. Just like the Zapruder film may be part of the production. Kind of convenient
earlier that day, JFK had violated security protocols and pissed off the Secret Service. And there was even a news broadcast where the announcer was like, okay, well, here are the two moments where he broke protocol, and let's recall that in 19 tickety whatever that Woodrow Wilson did the same thing, and he was shot with a revolver, and that was part of the broadcast, was to sort of put it in people's heads that JFK had gone outside of the protocols for security. And they pointed back to the last time that a president had done that, and the result was he had been shot. And this is like moments before he got into the car to go drive around Dallas.
Can I also point out, too, as well, I want to harp on a few things and just kind of build on what you said. First of all, we have to talk about the point that JFK was no angel. When Meyer Lansky passed away in 1980, early 80s, his wife did an interview. His widowed wife did an interview with 60 Minutes. And I believe in that interview right there, she had even said that JFK, as a senator, had gone to Cuba many times to look for women when they had to deal with Batista and they were starting to build out their operation over there. And literally, he was under the watch of Traficantes while he was down there looking for women in Cuba. So he was no angel himself, JFK. And I want to just talk about the way the hit was made, because back in the days, a lot of times when the mafioso made a hit, it was to send a message. In fact, Frank Costello once eventually got to this one wise guy who was a hitman who had sung on 3 people. He had testified against 3 bosses, and the 3 bosses had been put to death, actually. And they found him, they got him, they threw him out of the window, and the message was, you see this rat over here, this canary over here, he can sing like a canary, but he can't fly like one. So I think the open killing of JFK was also a message from an organized crime family was, you don't cross us. You don't have your brother go at the heart of our operations right now, which was Jimmy Hoffa and everything that was involved with the money right there, which was bankrolling a lot of their operations. So I think there was a message to be sent at that time, like, hey, buddy, you better watch who you're playing with. Now, that was the mafioso back then. I mean, now it's a different story, and I think the deep state and the intelligence community is so much, they're the mafioso. They're the big wise guys right now. But, I mean, there's so many, avenues pointing of this family doing business with organized crime for so many years and then crossing them in 2 different ways, crossing the intelligence community, that, it wasn't only just a murder. It wasn't only just a hit. It was a message. Watch who you're fooling with, pal. We put you in power. We'll take you out of power. I certainly don't know why the Kennedys, and a lot of people said this, that the Kennedy kids were not their father. The father was a bootlegger, was involved with a lot of bad stuff, was involved with gambling and booze and this whole 9 yards. Well, these kids were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, you know what I'm saying, and really thought who the hell they were. For better or for worse, they weren't their father, and they got out of line, and they didn't realize the people who had put them in power and the strength they had. And they thought when they got in power that they were the authorities now. It just wasn't the case from everything we look at and everything we talk about, And for me, like I said, the Ruby thing just makes you go, here's a guy just walks right up, whacks Oswald, boom, in public right there, what's going on, ride his time out. And all the connections he had. For me, it was like, it's the mafia, plain and simple. They're cutting all the ties. Same thing with the intelligence community. Cut all the ties. or the Clinton Foundation. Cut all the ties that could testify you or speak against you, get rid of them, and then nobody can say nothing.
I think you can apply that, pretty seamlessly to this assassination as well when you consider like the clear and apparent failure of the Bay of Pigs and like the subsequent firing of Alan Dulles. And like I don't think JFK was acting like altruistically. Honestly, I think some of his like jabs at the CIA were just out of pure ego, to be honest, because he may not have wanted to be controlled by the CIA, by the deep state. And, it resulted in firings of people like Alan Dulles after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. So I can see how that narrative can go to it as well. And just to kind of like backtrack to a previous point, shit, my mind is all over the place right now. I was just going to say, there's like so many different theories out right now. I feel like the mechanisms put in place to push different theories out there are kind of a way to keep us guessing what happened instead of why it happened. Because like even CIA and intelligence assets pushed out their own theories. Like there's a newspaper that came out a couple days after JFK assassinated where they took like a picture of Fidel Castro and just straight up like OJ mugshotted that bitch. And it was like Fidel Castro involved in plot to kill JFK. And it was like Fidel said himself that he tried to arrange to meet with the Warren Commission on a yacht because he was worried that they would try and pin it on him. And then you also have like anti-Castro groups in Miami. And that's where the involvement of like Joannids comes in, and where Morley versus CIA was trying to get access to those files to get like his role in the cover up and pushing out that theory. But like, I think one thing that kind of gets lost and pushing out all theories is like why it happened, or like what's missing from these that'll make the discussion like really dangerous to the deep state, or really dangerous to the powers that be that wanted JFK dead, or that wanted a massive psyop to take place to essentially like propagandize the American people. And I think that's where 9/11 plays in. Like, I don't think they're entirely related, but I think in the sense that like it marks a turning point. That's kind of what I mean when I think that they're alike. It marks a turning point in the sense that like I just don't know what a pre-9/11 world is like. Sorry, like y'all are way older than me. I have no idea what a pre-9/11 world is like. And
we're not that much older. Take it easy. God damn,
every day is like this, Pasta. Every day.
I know,
Reminded
Lori loves picking on older white men.
Holders in glory. Every day.
Every day. Every time I see her, she puts me in my place.
Well, let me tell her what a pre-9/11 is. Pre-9/11 world.
Your ass down.
A pre-9/11 world was, they were telling us there was an economic boom. I was in college doing graphic design, thinking I was going to make, $120,000 a year coming out of college. Gas was 99 cents. I was at Woodstock 99. I smiled a lot more. That was a pre-9/11 world for me. And then afterwards, I guess instantaneously, at least my generation had never felt that level of fear, especially pressured by the media. Growing up against the Red Scare and the Cold War and the duck and cover drills, there was a lot of hope. I mean, they portrayed not only, was Gorbachev making deals with Reagan, but later on we were rocking the vote with Boris Yeltsin. So there was a time period prior to 9/11, everything felt pretty good. The economy was booming during the internet. Gas was cheap. They were telling everybody they were going to have great jobs. You could go to college. And it all kind of fell apart during that era of the war on terror when, a lot of our rights went by the wayside. Things like Homeland Security were created. No one was making the Deutschland security analogies. And in that moment, I think that mentally, whether we realize it or not as a collective, we acquiesced so many of our civil liberties that even today we no longer have.
The Patriot Act, right?
I mean, you go with the Patriot
AUMF,
Act.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Everything came out of that thing.
Great.
Yeah.
No.
Let me just say this. Number one, I fully have accepted that we live in an oligarchy. I think what we're struggling to do right now, and we're actually doing it at the show as we speak, is to try to pinpoint the moment that this country became an oligarchy. So we speak of in terms of pre and post 9/11, what went on with JFK, because we feel that something's been lost. Personally, I think this country's been an oligarchy for a very, very long time that goes back way before I was born, and I'm 43, and actually goes back before the baby boomers were born, quite honestly. And I think a lot of these events are psychological operations meant to remind the population what the power structure is, although there is always a desire by the deep state, I think, to not allow us to see with clarity the original moment when this country is transformed from, call it a republic or a democratic republic or what have you, into a bona fide oligarchy. Because I think giving us that knowledge would be dangerous in a certain sense. And that's why, by the way, the JFK narrative or the counter narrative is so seductive, because it gives you that originary moment, that satisfaction of knowing, yeah, this is the moment we had an elected president. Okay, the votes were a little shady in Chicago, but he was an elected president. The people loved him. Camelot, yada, yada, and then, these cruel, heartless oligarchs, concocted this masterful plan to blow his head open, and life's never been the same since. And then a month later, the Beatles come and sing "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and you have the beginning of the Beatles psyop, and people are turned into the counterculture of the 60s, and they're told to go this way, that way, but never, but their anxiety and their energy is misdirected and mashed up in all sorts of directions, so that the deep state ensures that there's no, countervailing reaction to the Kennedy assassination that would be sort of a people taking back the country. That, I think, is the alternative narrative. I just want to point out something, though. Okay, the people are familiar with the coup that was foiled in the 1930s, or supposedly foiled, the Smedley Butler testimony. So basically, this guy, I think he was a general, or he was in the military. He was a colonel. He was a general. He came to Congress and he said, I have to, just lay it out there to Congress. There's a coup by all these oligarchic-like people. It was called the business plot. It involved like the DuPonts and the Morgans and so forth, and they're going to take the government by force. Okay, and by coming out, Smedley Butler prevented that from happening, and he's like an unsung hero. I mean, at least that's how the narrative goes. One of the things that Smedley Butler said that was interesting about this coup was that they had, supposedly the plotters had this idea that they were going to take the government in a clandestine sort of way so that the public wouldn't be aware. And one of the thoughts they had was that if FDR would be approached and pressured in order to feign an illness to the public, and basically this shadow government was going to be installed, and somebody was going to be installed under him to actually run the country. My suggestion is maybe that clandestine plot was actually carried out, okay, in some form or another. Maybe Smedley Butler didn't actually foil a coup. Maybe the whole Smedley Butler narrative is an attempt to make us believe that at that moment in time, the plotters weren't successful, because among those plotters would have been Joe Kennedy. I mean, he had an oligarchic seat at the table. And if it's true that the plotters were successful and that they kind of sent Smedley Butler out there to basically, because nothing actually came of, there were no like hangings or like, you know, it's not like Congress said, oh, treason, you know, you've come to us with testimony of treason. We need to go out and execute the Morgans, the DuPonts, the Rockefellers, and everybody involved with this because a sovereign country can't stand for this type of treason. No, that didn't happen at all. Instead, it was just kind of like there were these sealed proceedings and we really don't know what, if anything, happened. Maybe this was all a smokescreen that they sent out. Maybe the Kennedys were involved at that point in time, and maybe part of the ongoing promulgation of this coup involves the Kennedy family, or what we're told is the Kennedy family, putting out these characters such as JFK, RFK, you know, Teddy, JFK Jr. I mean, it just seems very odd to me that this goes on and on and on over the decades with this family in a way that is just totally unnatural to how families react when they're like attacked by malevolent forces, which leads me, I can't get it out of my head. And again, do I have any hard answers on any of this? Absolutely not. This is all just thinking in process, thinking in motion, dealing with things as they come in. But it just seems over and over, the sort of scripted narrative quality of this whole thing, going back to this, you know, these times when we know that coups were being plotted and undertaken against the government, leads me to believe that there's just a lot buried under there that we don't know. And, you know, as citizens of an oligarchy, we don't have a right to know. We're basically in a position of not really having any agency with respect to our government as citizens. So it's something that we have to digest, but I don't know that we should, you know, maybe my last point will be, I don't know that we should, you know, make ourselves feel bad or feel like we've lost anything as people or we've had something taken away from us, because I think it's been this way in this country for a very, very long time. And a lot of what we've been sold is pure mythology.